encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. This is the podcast on which we discuss all things preaching and ministry. My name is Robert Hatfield, and we're coming to you from the exhibit hall floor at Polishing the Pulpit 2024 in Sevierville, Tennessee. I'm excited today to sit down with Chance Hicks, who is one of our wonderful podcasters here at the Light Network, co-host on 4 Preachers and a podcast, and trying to clean up my mess that I made in North Charleston, South Carolina from my 5-year tenure there.
Still working on it.
What's up, Chance? How you doing?
I'm glad to be with you. It was kind of odd to not hear 4 Preachers in a podcast music.
I know.
I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This is the wrong music playing.
Wrong show. What's going on here?
But we're too short for that.
That's correct.
That is like 2 people short.
Yes, not T-O-O, but T-W-O.
Well, probably the first one, too.
Okay, both of those things. Catch 4 Preachers on a Podcast Fridays from thelightnetwork.tv or your favorite podcast app. Hiram is back.
He is back.
That's all we'll say.
That's the best part of the show.
We've been doing a fun series on prayer this season, and I'm enjoying that a lot. It's been good for me.
I think it's going to be really helpful and really practical for me, and going to challenge me and push me in some ways. So I'm looking forward to finishing that section of the season out. Yeah,
it's going to be cool. Speaking about challenging and pushing us a little bit, today we have an interesting topic, and I'm excited to discuss this. We've never done an episode in our 11-year history of this podcast on imagination as it relates to preaching. Tell us what prompted this. You've been thinking about this a little bit lately. Like, where did this come from?
Well, really, it was prompted from maybe a challenge. One of the members at North Charleston, we came back from a week at Indian Creek Youth Camp that I helped direct, and so I came back and I preached one of the sermons that I preached at camp about being real and used some things that connected with the younger group, and so she was like, "Hey, you hit on a bunch of different groups and related to a lot of people today." She's like, "I would really like to see if you could preach on unicorns."
Okay.
So I was like,
unicorns.
Unicorns. Like, how am I going to preach on unicorns? But I was like, okay,
KJV
sure.
only.
I'm like, so I don't know if you're being serious in this moment or like you're just trying to stump me. But okay, I'll think about it.
Yeah.
And so obviously I can go to the King James and I can find the word unicorn and Numbers, and God has delivered with the strength of the unicorn.
Okay, yeah.
But, so as I tried to think about that, I was like, unicorns drove me to think about imagination. Because unicorns are the product of someone's creative thinking and imagination.
That's your way of saying they're not real.
That is correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
Very tactful.
It's not hidden out there somewhere, but someone dreamed up this horse-like creature.
With a horn.
Mythical. Some of them are magical even.
Yes.
In some realms of imagination and creativity.
Right.
And so that kind of drove me to think about imagination, and so I wound up preaching a sermon on imagination and how imagination in Psalm 139, 13 and 14, where David says, "I'm fearfully and wonderfully made." And just thinking about the fact that God created us with the ability, with a mind that could think and create and imagine and could take things that are already there and somehow in our brain envision how to put them together into something else and create something out of them. Yeah. Or even that we have the ability in our mind for you to say something and my mind can imagine it, put it together in a picture, and now I can envision that in my head. And so it's just one of the amazing things about how God created us. And it's obvious when you look around the world that we live in, the technology that surrounds us, the air-conditioned buildings that we sit in. People are a people of imagination, and we enjoy air conditioning because someone somewhere was like, I think we can figure out a way to cool this air down and force it through these channels and make it go into this room. Like someone thought of that, created it. It was wonderful. And we get to benefit from that. But like the animal kingdom obviously is not demonstrating imagination and creativity to the same extent. So it's one of the things that sets us apart as those who are created in God's image. And so David's like, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And thinking about imagination and the ability to create should remind us that we are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made, and should drive us to thank God. Whether we envision that we are on the super creative and imaginative end of the spectrum, or on the I don't think I've ever created or imagined anything, like either end of the spectrum, right, should drive us to be a people who thank God and praise Him for creating us in that way.
That's an awesome thought. I like that. Okay, so we got 3 points that we want to consider today, and as we go, we're going to fold this into specifically how it relates to preaching, right? As we sort of go through this.
Hopefully, it kind of does that.
Yeah. But because there's a lot of imagination in preaching.
Sure, needs to be, and
not in the content itself.
Correct, but in how in how we are going to communicate that,
right?
So it can be impactful, and so it can be retained.
I was thinking, I think it's Donald Whitney's book, or maybe it was someone else's. But what I'm thinking, it's Whitney's book on spiritual disciplines for the Christian life. But he talks about how, as he's going through the discipline of Bible reading, part of that discipline is not just passing your eyes over words, but imagining what it's like. And I don't know how people imagine the face of Jesus must have looked when he was on earth, or what they imagine the temple or the tabernacle may have looked like. Or even, the vision of Isaiah in Isaiah 6, or of John in Revelation. I mean, these things are described for us to paint a mental picture. And sometimes the challenge for us is to try and figure out how to communicate that, because these are imaginative, even concepts sometimes. Yeah.
Take this imaginative scene and put it into words and describe it.
Right.
Okay.
What does that even mean?
Can I get like a picture book?
Right. Yeah. Or have you ever been teaching Isaiah 6 or Revelation or something, and you're wanting to make a slide, and it's like, well, how do I visualize this? Don't Google it. I'll tell you that much.
And even the places where you can sign up for the subscription, where they provide high quality artwork and slides like that, they also are not a great place to go to try to find slides that help you visualize some of those things.
Right.
But it's really amazing just to think about, we are the product not only of God's creative hand, but the product of God's imagination. Like we first originated in the mind of God. Like He first thought about creating humanity. And so then He gave us that same kind of imaginative ability. And, we need to be certain that we protect that and use it for good. And so that's where it kind of helps us as we think about using it in the realm of preaching.
Okay. So it starts with sort of stewarding that in a way that is good.
And you think about Proverbs 4:23, Solomon talks about guarding our heart with all wisdom, because out of it are the issues of life. But included in guarding our mind is guarding and protecting the way that we use our imagination. And so you could think of passages a couple of times in the prophet Zechariah 7 and Zechariah 8. God's message through the prophet Zechariah was, don't plan evil in your heart against your brother, or don't think evil in your heart against your neighbor. And really, it's a caution to guard your imagination. Like don't use the creative ability of your mind to dream up and scheme up ways that you could harm or do evil or take advantage of one who is your brother, or even broader than that, one who is your neighbor. And I think we live in a culture and a society where that's easily done, and you can see it happening, and we can be swept away into using our mind and our imagination in that direction. And you can walk through, Genesis 6, prior to the flood, man's thoughts were only evil continually, and they're planning. Or Genesis 11, like here's technology, and yet they're thinking about the last time we didn't do what God said, he sent a flood, so we don't want to go where he's sending us. We're supposed to spread out. We want to stay here. How are we going to avoid his judgment of the flood? And they get real creative, and they're like, we'll just take our ability to build, and we'll just build this tower to the sky, and we'll avoid that. And so, they're just misusing this wonderful ability that God created and God made. Or 2 Samuel 13 with Amnon and Tamar and Jonadab, and Amnon is enamored with Tamar, and it's his best friend who's like, okay, I've concocted this scheme. Like, you just pretend that you're sick, we'll get her to come take care of you, and then you just take advantage of the situation for what you want. And so it's really easy to be pulled away into using our imagination to dream and to conspire evil. And so we've got to be very careful to protect that ability that we have, and then channel it towards using it for good in a way that's going to glorify God.
When I think about the grudges we hold, the bitterness we might have, what I used to think heaping coals of fire on their heads meant, because I guess in my immature state, I was imagining something else.
Yes. You could imagine really great heaping coals of fire.
Yeah,
large
correct.
amounts,
Yes, I could. But yeah, it's point well taken. And I mean, everything, that really goes back to, keep your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the issues of life. Yeah. Or whatever things are true and right and lovely and praiseworthy and virtuous, think on these things. Kind of material. We've got to guard the way that we think about our hearts and what we allow into them even.
And even it goes to Proverbs 6, the 6 things the Lord hates, the 7 that are an abomination, is the one who devises wicked imaginations, right? Who, like, this is listed among major, if you want to talk of it in those terms, like classified with a proud look, a lying tongue,
right?
Using this ability God's given us in a way that would harm or hurt or destroy. And obviously the goal is using imagination and preaching on the opposite end. Right. How are we going to use it in preaching to communicate, build up, to use it for good? So it's the prayer of the psalmist in Psalm 19 and verse 14, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing and acceptable.
That's right.
Well, it's our thinking, but also even then the mind would include our ability to create and imagine. Like, even our imaginations we want to be using in a way that would be helpful, that would be glorifying, that would to please God. And so I think David is a great example of that. 2 Samuel 12, or the prophet Nathan, who's going to talk to David. It's like, okay, wait a minute. I've got to go stand before the king who has committed adultery with Bathsheba and killed her husband, and now I've got to go address him and try to bring him to repentance. Like, how am I going to do that? I guess he could have approached him directly, but it was very effective the way that he used his imagination to craft a story about a poor little man with a ewe lamb and the rich man who had a bunch of his own lambs. And so he could David could even envision the story that he's telling, the parable. And like, it's obvious in this situation what should have happened. Like, the rich man should not have taken advantage, and then Nathan's able to make the application and say, okay, you're the man in this situation. And David sees that, and it brings him to a place of contrition and repentance. Or Jesus in his parables. The imaginative mind of taking the things that were common and using those as stories to connect with the hearts of people where they can hold on to it. Here is a shepherd who has 100 sheep and one's lost and he's going to find it. Here's a woman who has lost this silver and she's sweeping her house until she finds it. Here's this son that the younger son's going to take his inheritance and run off. And you can envision those things, and Jesus using his imagination to help connect to his audience and draw them to understand these spiritual truths. It maybe one of the interesting pictures of imagination is in Acts 9, where they need to get Saul out of the city because there's threats against his life. And so they're like, hey, here's a big basket, and we're going to tie a rope to it, and we're going to turn it into an elevator. It's like, we don't even know what elevators are, but here we are. And we're
They
suddenly
invented it right there.
are in using our imagination to take different things and see a different way to use it that can accomplish good. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, how can we then take an imaginative approach to preaching? I think it's easy to get into the rut of, okay, this sermon is an introduction. I've got to have some points, then I'm going to drive it to a conclusion.
Yeah.
And it's just easy to get into a rut of, okay, what's the text for this week? I approach it in the same way. I build the sermon in the same way, communicate it in the same way. And that can be effective, but could we be more effective if we, and it takes more work, more thought, slowing down to think about, okay, how can I be imaginative in approaching this topic or this text or in the presentation of it? I think you're great at imagination. I mean, look, the Light Network is the product of your creativity and your imagination. We're here because at some point in the life of Robert Hatfield and in his brain, he's thinking about, okay, podcasting, and now it has turned into the Light Network. And,
for better or for worse.
For better or for worse. And you invited me on it for worse, I think so.
Here we are. That was one of the better moments. There haven't been a many, but that was one of the better moments.
But here it is. Like, this is the product of imagination and creativity.
And everybody's show sort of takes on their own imaginative portions of it as well. I was thinking about the way this translates too, not just into preaching, but also into ministry. And, we can imagine what will it be like when we accomplish this goal, when, the building is paid off, and then we can invest more in local evangelism or local benevolence or whatever it is. And we sort of dream, or if you're in charge of VBS, you're working the imaginative muscle very hard.
Like, our Bible classes and like Vacation Bible School are a wonderful area to see the members of the church engaging their imagination. Like, to walk into some of those classrooms at Vacation Bible School time and to see the decorations that they have thought up and have put together, and they've taken random pieces of tissue paper and tablecloths, and now they've created this amazing interactive scene that kind of lets you envision something of what it would have been like to walk into and to be involved in that event as it was unfolding. Yeah. And so it connects not only with the kids, the children sitting in there and listening, but now their senses are engaged in other ways too. And so those things, but I don't know, sometimes we just regulate that to, that's for children's classes, and then when you move up into adulthood, then it's just, we're going to lecture you, and there might be a PowerPoint that we flip through with some words on the screen.
Nothing too fancy.
Nothing too fancy. And then we're moving on. But imagination and creativity, even in adult classes and in preaching, can resonate with the heart, connect with people, give them something that they can carry with them. Yeah. I mean, do you think you've preached imaginative sermons? Could you think of one that comes to mind that's like...
Not until this year, okay? Because this year it was suggested, our family minister at Henderson, and we would assume he would, this would be a top of his mind, but he said, hey, we've got this growing number of young families with young children, and he was trying to think, what could we do to make them know that they are valued and to support them in some way? And so he said, when we were making our sermon plan for this year, last year, he said, hey, what if you preach some sermons that were just basic stories of the Bible, And I thought, oh, that's an interesting thought. And so from that sort of, it imaginatively became what we're calling stories that shape us. And I went through and I picked at least one Bible story from each period of Old Testament history. Just, that was the way how do you arbitrarily choose? So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it that way. And so we'll kind of have the arc of the Old Testament story by the end of the year. But I said, I kind of want these sermons to be not quite a normal sermon, but also not full on VBS.
Right.
So, like, what's something we could do? And I got this team of school teachers to help me think of a simple but effective visual. So, like, they found this thing on Pinterest. You know, I'm not on Pinterest, but they found it on Pinterest, and they sent it to me, and to illustrate the fall in the garden. It involved lighting a candle and blowing up a balloon and popping the balloon. So I did, like, in the middle of the sermon. I popped multiple balloons.
I wanted to be there.
Yeah, it was an interesting moment. But the idea was, okay, once that's done, it can't be undone.
Yeah.
And I picked up the pieces and illustrated that. And then later in the sermon, to illustrate what Jesus does and how Jesus makes it possible for us to be forgiven of our sins, but also guarded from sin. I got a water balloon and prayed that it didn't pop. And it didn't. But according to the Pinterest thing, when you put that over the candle flame, it doesn't pop. It just, the bottom of the balloon blackens. And it sort of gives you this notion that, here's what sin can do for you, but with Jesus, sin doesn't break you.
It leaves you scarred.
Yeah. So, we know its effects, but ultimately we're not broken by it. And anyway, obviously we had to make sure that we taught that accurately for the sake of the kiddos, but at the same time, that is stretching me, and it's causing me to realize I'm really not that imaginative. Because I'm like, I do not know how to do this. But it's been fun. It's been a fun thing to experiment with.
But it was great because, and I didn't know I knew some of the backstory of this, that you've done some of these stories that shape us with some visual aids and things.
Yeah.
But I really didn't know that you had gone to some of the school teachers and incorporated a group of other creative-minded people.
Yeah, I gave them the 12 sermons. We're doing one a month on a Sunday night. Gave it to them, and they're generating things to do. Yeah, we did Abraham and Isaac, Abraham offering Isaac from Genesis 22, and we turned the Lord's Supper table into an altar. And so I wrapped it with this bulletin board paper that looks like stones.
Nice.
Okay, and so that was easy. And then I put a box fan and turned it where it would be blowing up, and I got red and yellow and orange streamers and attached it to the fan so that when I turned on the fan, it looked like fire. And the kids were enamored by that. Yeah. I mean, I had everybody's attention when I turned on that
awesome.
fan. Yeah, it was cool.
See, creative.
It was fun.
Imaginative.
Yeah. And then after worship was over, all the kids came up and took turns lighting, quote-unquote, lighting the fire.
How does this fire work?
Yeah, that's right. Kids, don't play with fire at home. That's what I had to tell them. This isn't usually like this.
So, yeah, I mean...
that's been fun, though.
And I think you will find that's going to be impactful for the long run. That's going to be something that stays
memorable.
With them.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they can remember. They may not remember what Robert said exactly.
Right.
But Robert preached on this one time, and there was a fire.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Robert popped balloons.
Balloons in here?
Yeah, well, my son, because one of our youth ministers was helping me with the balloon popping thing. And a few days later, my son, out of the blue, he's 5, and he says, I really liked your sermon Sunday, Daddy. Oh, well, thank you. He doesn't normally say that on Wednesday after the Sunday is over. And I said, what'd you like about it? And he said, I liked that Caleb won. Caleb is the youth minister, not Caleb of the Bible. Nice. Caleb is the youth minister. And I said, he won? He's like, yeah, I was on Caleb's team. And I thought, you did not get it, but that's okay. My 8-year-old got it. My 5-year-old did not get it.
Then you just have to go back and
we'll
preach
just do it again. That's right.
3 years from now.
Bring on the balloons.
Return.
Oh, boy.
I think we can be that creative and imaginative, but it doesn't necessarily have to go to that kind of level.
I hope not. Yeah. we can't pop balloons every Sunday.
Because then it's what am I going to do next week?
Yeah, exactly.
But even being imaginative in how we're approaching something that's familiar. Acts 8, Philip and the eunuch.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times have you walked through in a Bible class or a sermon. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of familiarity with the text of Acts 8 and the account of Philip and the eunuch. But I have preached that text not from the standpoint of Philip or the standpoint of the eunuch, but from the standpoint of the chariot driver.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, he's sitting in the chariot and he's reading, and he's stopping in and inviting Philip in, so he's obviously not driving.
Yeah.
So, okay, what would it be like to live this scene through the eyes of another?
Somebody else.
Okay, so you're driving the chariot, you're overhearing everything that's happening, you're the one who's commanded to stop. Like, what impact is this having on you?
See, you're good at this. You're very imaginative in this one.
I'm not certain, but
I think you are.
I came across that one. That one worked. I enjoyed studying it from that and preaching it from that vantage point.
Yes.
And so hopefully that
So what did you go? Like what he overheard or what? What was the direction?
Some of that.
Yeah.
You put me on the spot. I don't remember the exact
I'm
points.
sorry.
But what it was really like what you would learn about baptism from the standpoint. Well, you would know that baptism is a response to learning about Jesus, coming to faith in him. Or you would learn that baptism is a burial in water in response to coming to faith in Jesus that sends you on your way rejoicing.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's what you. And so I took that kind of sentence and broke it down into 3 sections to kind of walk through the text from that.
That's cool.
From that vantage point of like, okay, it's a burial in water because you've seen them both get out of your chariot. You watch them go down into the water. You watch the immersion. You watch them come back, get back in the chariot for you to continue driving. Yeah. And you know that happened because they were talking about somebody named Jesus. Like you may not have heard as much as the eunuch heard, like your passenger, but you overheard some of this conversation. Yeah. And so the conclusion that I came to is like, okay, well, what if, I mean, we viewed it from that standpoint. What if we are the chariot driver? How are we going to respond to what we have seen and heard? Maybe he gets back. He wheels into home, dropping off the eunuch, and he's like, hey, before you go, could you tell me a little bit more about what happened?
Right.
Like, why did we... And they get to have a conversation about who Jesus is and responding to him in baptism. So just a unique approach to an account and a passage that you're already familiar with. I've done something similar in preaching on the resurrection. And I preached it from the vantage point of one of the soldiers who would have been given the responsibility of guarding the tomb and keeping it safe. And I think I entitled it something like...
I don't know, I blacked out.
Correct. Like, I entitled it Interview with a Soldier or something like that. Yeah. And it was a unique sermon because I didn't really quote any passages of Scripture. And I didn't give any references in the sermon. But I put them all on the slide. So on my PowerPoint slide. Oh, okay. Because it was, okay, let's suppose we're interviewing someone was there, and I don't remember, don't ask me what all the questions were. But I had like some interview questions. So I was like, okay, we're asking, and I explained this up front in my introduction. Like, this is going to be a different kind of sermon because I'm going to basically pretend that I am that soldier, and that's how I'm going to communicate this to you. Wow. So we're going to pose the question, and then I'm going to answer it as if I were that soldier who was there. Yeah. And so the references are on the screen for all the passages that I am using to draw this information together. And so, I don't know, I enjoyed it. It was a very unique approach, I thought, cool. And so it was like, yes, this is what I saw happening. This is the reason why we were there. We were dispatched to, we were fearful his disciples were going to come and take him away. So we were dispatched. We were told this is our responsibility. Like, no, we didn't fall asleep. Like, this is our job. Yeah. We take this very seriously. But, like, this is what I saw, how we responded to the angel. Most of us, but let's suppose most of us are running scared or unconscious, but a couple of us were able to hide away and just kind of observe from our place of hiding what unfolded and know the disciples didn't come. And the tomb is empty. Yeah. And like they came and tried to give us money to say that they came, but like I can't take that money because that's not what I saw and it's not what happened.
Wow.
So it just
cool.
lets you approach a common topic, a thing that you would preach on, emphasize the resurrection of Jesus from a much different vantage point. And creative in that way. Or you could talk about Calvary from the vantage point of Barabbas.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what it would have been like to see Calvary through the eyes of Barabbas. That's really who we are.
Yeah.
We are the ones who should have died, and he is the one who died in our place.
I was thinking Mike Vestal led communion thoughts here at PTP Worship this week, and he said, "I wonder what Mary was thinking when she observed the Lord's Supper the first time." And I'm thinking, well, that was imaginative. Now, of course, he used, I think, 5 different scenes.
Right.
He told me he did it differently between the early service and the late service.
Really?
Yeah, but in the early service he used 5 scenes from John, and in the late service he used 5 scenes from Luke. But in each of those, times when Mary was around and the things that she observed that were undoubtedly in her heart when there she is remembering, her son. It's amazing. But that was an imagination.
Sure. Yep.
Thing.
And built off of passages
Scripture,
where you can go reflect over these things and then draw them all together in a creative way.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily just like, today we're going to talk about baptism. Point number 1 is...
That's all right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can structure this in a way that is more imaginative and creative, more storytelling, narrative.
Catchy, memorable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you do remember those kinds of things. And you may not be able to do that every single week.
Absolutely
and
not.
There's nothing wrong with, hey, here's a sermon about baptism and here's 5 reasons why you got to do it. But there's also nothing wrong with trying to make it memorable.
Right. And some of it just, at least for me, has just been working through the text, and it just, I don't know, there's just a moment of spark of like, oh, I could do it that way. And that spark of creativity doesn't come every week or once a month. So and sometimes it's borrowed from a thought that you got from somewhere else. So reading widely, or reading people who are really good at words and illustrations, and trying to put I've been reading some C.S. Lewis, and that's one of the things that Lewis was really good at, especially in like Mere Christianity, trying to take these abstract thoughts that he's trying to, and arguments that he's trying to put together, and he's like, okay, let me try to put this into an illustration for you. And so he's really creative and imaginative in trying to put it into something that you can envision in a picture, and he's up front in a lot of those, saying like, these might not be perfect parallels, but I think it helps to give your mind something to think about and to envision. And so reading can kind of help you in that area, or you might read someone's approach to it that sparks the thought of, okay, I've never thought about it from that person's perspective or that person's vantage point, and let you build an imaginative sermon.
That's right.
But it doesn't even have to be a whole sermon if it is.
That's true, yeah.
Okay, what is the one thought that I really want to communicate? And can I come up with an imaginative or creative way that this one thought is communicated?
Yeah.
And so it could just be the words of one real sentence so that those thoughts stick with you.
That's a good point.
And so one of the things that I have done in a couple of sermons is this is just, and it really dovetailed with the Acts 8 sermon. Baptism is a burial in water in response to Jesus that leads to a heart of rejoicing. And so you pack it all into one sentence, and the sermon is just digging into those thoughts. With Acts 8, it happened to also be imaginative from the perspective of the chariot driver, but you can go to other passages and work through them, and it just becomes, okay, this passage is summed up in this one really well thought out sentence, and then we walk through that sentence together, and it just allows that passage to unfold instead of the basic. It's still maybe 3 or 4 points that you're going to highlight, but it's all built into one sentence. And it's like, okay, if I can remember that sentence, then I have really the heart of what this passage is communicating.
Mm-hmm. All right, so backing up and just high-leveling again for a minute, tell us the 3 points you used when you preached this sermon about imagination.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Guard your imagination.
Yep. So our imagination is something that needs to be protected.
Okay.
Something that should be used for good.
Okay.
And then the one we haven't really talked about yet is that it helps us exalt God.
Okay.
And that thought came from Ephesians 3:20 and 21. To him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. And the NIV translates it all that we ask or imagine.
Imagine, yeah.
And that he can do not just above, but abundantly above, but even then exceedingly abundantly above. It's like, Paul, what are you trying to say? Like, it's way, way up there, much higher than you can think.
Pretty great.
Pretty great. Like, as wonderful as the ability to imagine that God gave us, he can do well beyond anything we could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And so it just, I mean, you see the imagination, and I mean, you think of places like, it's hard to talk about imagination and not feel like you're riding Figment at Disney World. Imagination, you know. And so you just hear that song.
One little spark.
One little spark.
That's right.
And you see what people have created because of imagination.
Yeah.
But then to read a passage like Ephesians 3, and to see how Paul is extolling God and what he can do. And so imagination should just drive us to praise and exalt him.
So, for whatever reason, we seem to be resistant, a very broad we, to this idea of exercising our imaginations, especially as it relates to Christianity.
Sure.
However, you've pointed out, I mean, the Bible is filled with references or allusions to the fact that God created us out of his own, shall we say, imagination, and then has equipped us likewise to exercise imagination, and we see that in everything, the talents people have, and not just the artsy kind of stuff, but in everything. You know, somebody dreamed up something, somebody had some spark, and that prompted something else.
Right.
So, and we've also noted that when we read the Bible, like it's supposed to prompt our, the scenes in our imagination to get going. It's supposed to kickstart those juices and get us to thinking about it. And maybe it's intellectual laziness for us not to exercise the imagination a little more than we do, especially when we're reading certain passages, particularly the apocalyptic type literature. So, there's that. Just maybe as we begin the descent, you mentioned a minute ago about how we can grow or mature in our imagination a little bit, or how we can, that's not the best way to put it, but how we can do better, be more imaginative. I can't even imagine what I'm trying to say.
I can't imagine how to be more imaginative.
But you mentioned reading widely, things like that. I think that's great.
I think you hit on one, too. Yeah. Is like if you recognize maybe this isn't necessarily your strong suit, there are no doubt people in the congregation where you are, or people in your circle of life who have a stronger inclination, is that the right word, toward creativity and imagination, and so incorporate them into what you're doing. And point. I think that was a really neat thing that you said, that you included some others who have that ability and or know how to use Pinterest or to brainstorm ideas and say, okay, I might not be the most creative, but here's what I would like to do. Can you help me come up with some creative ways to communicate this or to approach it? And I think there has been some hesitation to creativity and imagination. It's like, well, we've never done anything like that before.
Yeah.
But we've got to be willing to use what God has given us for his good, for our good and his glory. And that would include how we steward our imagination, and how we use it. So,
that's a good point.
Yeah, stewarding it to protect it, sure.
Yeah.
But stewarding it to use it for good and to help communicate God's word to God's people, or even to those who are outside of the kingdom, in a way that's going to captivate their imagination and give an opportunity for the gospel of Jesus to be planted in their heart.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to be a people of imagination and creativity. Right?
Yeah.
How are we going to accomplish that?
Right.
So
Yeah.
incorporating some people in the congregation, as far as like in preaching, to use imagination. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
all right, I want to preach. You're great at planning the calendar for the year, like so. There's creativity and imagination, but okay, 6 months from now we're going to talk about this story that shaped our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
So who can I find that can help me? Come up with something.
Right.
No, I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Good stuff. So it turns out that there's a lot to this imagination and preaching stuff, and thanks for sharing. This had not crossed my mind, but now it's like, boy, you see it everywhere. I mean, I'm thinking about the way Jesus describes hell.
Yep.
Where the fire is not quenched, the worm does not die, weeping and gnashing of teeth. That evokes some pretty vivid scenes in our imagination.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is a place, sure, I mean, you got the roots to Gehenna and, basically the trash heap just outside of Jerusalem. So there was something that they could use to kind of fuel their imagination. But at the same, this is a place they've never experienced before. Right. None of us have. Yep. How could we begin to get the picture? Well, he gives us a word picture, and then our imaginations take it from there.
Start filling in the blanks of what that looks like.
Yeah. Same thing with heaven. Yep. Revelation. I mean, we debate, are there really streets of gold and all that? It's a spiritual place. I don't know. I mean, is there gold in the spirit world? I don't know. But, like, you can... the visual is the point. Anyway, it's good stuff. Man, I'm not going to be able to unsee this now.
So, well, it all goes back to someone's like, hey, can you preach on unicorns?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do with that?
I can't.
No, I can't. I guess we can walk through King James passages and just say,
this
says unicorn, you should read wild ox or rhino, like it's just a one-horned beast of strength.
You really made lemonade out of lemons on that.
And I did preach that sermon on the Sunday morning that Vacation Bible School began.
Oh, see,
and so
that's
it
good.
paired well, and I was like, here's a great, and I talked about it in the sermon, like here is a great occasion where we get to see the creativity and imagination of some of our members and our Bible class teachers on display. Like we don't always go and see their classrooms through the regular course of the year, but I know there's creativity and imagination being used in how those stories and the Word of God and the Scriptures are communicated. But now we get to see it in like a grand scale.
That's right.
And like let's just carry that same kind of energy and momentum and creativity into the work continually.
And adults and kids need imagination and enjoy it.
Sure.
Right. I mean, you don't really outgrow that.
No.
So,
yeah. And even in adulthood, we can be imaginative and we can enjoy imagination and enjoy life.
Yeah.
And have fun and a good time.
Yeah. It's a good time.
Where is the Dr. Pepper?
Imagination in preaching. Hey, if you ever find yourself in Charleston, South Carolina, go by and visit the Hickses, and I know they will be glad to see you and all the great folks out there in Charleston. But anyway, you'll hear some good imaginative preaching.
It will be something.
Use your imagination.
That's correct.
So that it is good. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, Preachers in Training is brought to you by the Light Network, a community of podcasts that are designed to encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, empower your faith. And you can find more about us at thelightnetwork.tv. A quick reminder that you can catch new episodes of Preachers in Training every Thursday from that website and also our podcast partners. Watch the video on YouTube as well if you are so inclined. It's going to do it for this edition. Let's go preach the word.